The fall of Daniel Kingsley. Daniel Kingsley was a man born into affluence, surrounded by the luxuries and privileges that only wealth could afford. His family's estate sprawled over 500 acres in the lush countryside, complete with a mansion that boasted grand ballrooms, a private theater, and an extensive art collection. His father, Arthur Kingsley, was a titan of industry, with interests in railroads, steel, and shipping, ensuring that the Kingsley name was synonymous with power and prosperity. As a young man, Daniel was sent to the finest schools, where he received an education befitting his station. He was groomed to take over the family business, and by the time he reached his mid-30s, he had not only met but exceeded the expectations set for him. Daniel had a keen mind for business and a natural charisma that endeared him to both colleagues and competitors alike. His life seemed destined to follow a path paved with gold. However, Daniel's success came at a cost. He became increasingly detached from the realities of the world outside his gilded cage. Surrounded by sycophants and enablers, he developed a sense of invincibility, believing that his wealth and status would shield him from any adversity. His decisions grew more reckless, his investments more speculative, and his trust in unscrupulous advisors more profound. The first sign of trouble came when a series of risky ventures began to unravel. Daniel had poured significant resources into a speculative real estate project in a distant city, hoping to capitalize on an anticipated boom. Instead, the market crashed, leaving him with unsellable properties and mounting debts. At the same time, a trusted business partner was exposed as a fraud, embezzling millions from their joint venture. Determined to recoup his losses, Daniel doubled down on his remaining assets, investing heavily in an ambitious but untested technology startup. For a while, it seemed his gamble might pay off, but when the company failed to deliver on its promises, its stock plummeted, and Daniel's fortunes with it. The Kingsley empire, once unassailable, began to crumble. As his financial situation worsened, Daniel found himself selling off the family's prized possessions to cover debts. The art collection, the vintage cars, even the mansion itself, all were liquidated in a desperate attempt to stave off bankruptcy. Friends and allies, once eager to bask in his reflected glory, distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with a man whose star had so dramatically fallen. In a final, desperate bid to salvage something from the wreckage of his life, Daniel turned to the one person he had always avoided, his estranged brother, Thomas. Thomas had taken a different path, choosing a modest life as a schoolteacher in a small town. The two had never been close, their relationship strained by Daniel's relentless ambition and Thomas's disdain for the trappings of wealth. Swallowing his pride, Daniel traveled to Thomas's humble home, a far cry from the opulence he once knew. He stood on the doorstep, nerves fraying, and knocked. When Thomas opened the door, he was momentarily taken aback by the sight of his brother, now a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident, well-dressed mogul. In his place stood a haggard, weary man, his eyes pleading for help. "Thomas," Daniel began, his voice trembling. "I need your help. I've lost everything." Thomas regarded his brother with a mixture of pity and resolve. "Come in, Daniel," he said quietly. Inside, the two brothers sat at a worn kitchen table, and Daniel recounted the litany of his failures. He spoke of the bad investments, the betrayals, the mounting debts, and the isolation that came with his downfall. Thomas listened patiently, his expression inscrutable. When Daniel finished, he looked at his brother, waiting for judgment. But Thomas merely nodded and said, "You can stay here, Daniel. It's not much, but you're welcome." The adjustment to his new life was harsh for Daniel. Gone were the luxuries he had taken for granted. He now shared a modest home, contributing to household chores and living on a tight budget. Thomas helped him secure a job at the local school, where Daniel, once the master of boardrooms, found himself teaching basic math to disinterested teenagers. It was humbling, but it provided a steady income and a sense of purpose. Over time, Daniel began to find solace in the simplicity of his new life. He reconnected with his brother, building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. He discovered a sense of fulfillment in helping his students, many of whom came from backgrounds as modest as his own new circumstances. One evening, after a particularly trying day at the school, Daniel and Thomas sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. Daniel turned to his brother and said, "I used to think success was about having more money, more power, more status. But I've realized it's about something else entirely." Thomas smiled. "What have you learned, then?" Daniel took a deep breath. "That success is about connection, about making a difference in people's lives. It's about finding contentment in what you have, rather than always striving for more." Thomas nodded. "You've come a long way, Daniel." The journey from riches to rags had been brutal, but it had also been transformative. Daniel Kingsley, once a man defined by his wealth, had found a deeper, more enduring form of success in the humility and simplicity of his new life. He had lost his fortune, but in doing so, he had discovered his humanity.